maybe because it was off.
Check.
Can we try?
Yes, of course we can.
Cek. 1, 2, 3, cek.
Tic-tac-toe. This one is also working.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, the participants of Indonesia Pavilion. This is our last day in Indonesia Pavilion, but nevertheless, we have an exciting session, a fourth session for today. The first session will be about young professionalism for climate resilience, and we already have all our speakers here, also with both moderators. So yeah, for this session, I would like to pass the mic to Bu Yanti as the moderator for this session. So to Bu Yanti, please give a round of applause.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. A warm welcome to all of you. My name is Yanti. I will introduce myself in a minute. I will be moderating this event together with colleague, moderator, Desti Alcano. Yes, we are going to talk this morning about professionals in relation to climate change, and for that matter, professionalism in relation to climate change. When we think of professionals in relation or in association with climate change, we tend to think of professionals that traditionally are regarded working in the green sector, such as foresters, ecologists, biologists. But now we are going to talk about professionalism in a broader sense, since the diversity of professions that may be affected by climate change is quite broad. So we could also think of health work professionals, infrastructure, project managers, lawyers, etc., even accountants, tax professionals. So a broad range of professions. We are talking about climate resilience professionals in this session when we refer to professionals that use the best and the newest information and science to base their work on, to base their advice on, that they provide to clients, government, communities, etc., etc. We may be aware that while professionals that work on climate change increases with time, there's actually little discussion about their roles and responsibilities in relation to climate change, and that's why we're going to discuss that topic during this event. Yeah, I will leave it at that for the time being. So, yeah, Desti, perhaps you may want to introduce yourself.
Myself, yeah. So, my name is Desti Alcano, co-founder of Energy Academy Indonesia, shortly ECADIN, so ECADIN. So it's kind of online multidisciplinary community platform for sharing information, Indonesians sharing information and exchanging knowledge on energy-related sector. So we do have a regular program weekly, every 2 weeks. Every 2 weeks in a form of online sharing or interactive discussion like today, live streamed in our YouTube channel in Energy Academy Indonesia. So interactive discussion these days is more on renewable energy in tackling energy-related issues in Indonesia. So we are discussing among academia, industrial practitioners, and regulation makers. So far we have already had 30 online sharing, so you may take a look at our website on www.ekadin.org on the topics we have covered so far. That's it, I suppose.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now, a slight introduction of myself. I'm a consultant in the area of sustainable development and governance. And before starting an own consulting agency, I was engaged with the CGIAR system, a consortium of research institutions working on natural resource management. That's a short introduction of myself. Going back to Desti. Desti, please introduce the speakers.
Yeah, so before the talk begin, allow me to introduce our speakers. First, for the keynote speaker we have today, Mr. Yatna Supriyatna. I should not stand here. Professor Yatna Supriyatna is professor in the environmental science and biology from University of Indonesia. He's currently also director of Institute for Sustainable Earth and Resources, University of Indonesia, as well as the chair of Indonesia's United Nations on Sustainable Development Solutions Network. I should also directly introduce the other speakers, 5 speakers we have today. First one, we have Anissa Trianti. She's currently Young Scientist Representative of the United Nations International Strategy for Disaster Reduction. She's also right now finishing her PhD study at Department of Human Geography, Planning and International Development in University of Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Her study is on governance of coastal ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction in Indonesia as well as in India. Second panelist or speaker we have is Yveske van de Wouw. Wow. Wow. So wow here. She's currently Dutch youth representative to the UN on sustainable development. And the third one, we have Kamia Handayani. She's currently is a PhD researcher at Department of Governance and Technology for Sustainability, University of Twente, Enschede, the Netherlands. Her studies on climate change mitigation and adaptation in the Indonesian power sector, electricity sector, and since 2006, she has been in the PLN, Perusahaan Listrik Negara, in the Indonesian State Electricity Company. The fourth one we have today is Marcel Berkeboom. He's a climate envoy for the Kingdom of the Netherlands from Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Policy. And is it the last, but definitely not least, Tisa Mavira, Executive Director of the Indonesia Plastic Bag Diet Movement. So in Indonesia we call it Gerakan Indonesia Diet Kantong Plastic. Law and public policy expert in environmental law, waste management, and climate change policy. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our keynote speaker, Mr. Yatna Subriyatna. So floor is yours.
Very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Bapak Ibu, selamat pagi. I'd like to thanks for the invitation to give a 5-minute speech on how that really this youth movement and young professional working, as a teacher at the university for the last 40 years. I thought that this is really opportunity to work with on the climate change. And also I'm teaching climate change research and policy at the University of Indonesia. Ladies and gentlemen, I like to have 5 points, so that's for 5 minutes. One is about this, the policy. I thought that young professional, it's a very widespread here in Indonesia right now. There are many people really in favor of the environment. It seemed to me that this gerakan, this is the movement of Indonesia. It's really making me happy, because not only in high school but also at the university, even my new graduate student, there are a lot of talking about this. Or even the university now embracing climate change as one of the study on the curriculums. So this is really a very important one. The second one, I thought that the gerakan, the movement, the plastic, and everything is in Indonesia right now is really on demand. So, but the one that even this is really very demanding for everybody's, but it seemed to me that the weakness in Indonesia is really that young professional who has so much knowledge are really the difficulties in terms of science policy interface. This is really the most difficult one. I heard that from the NGO side, where a lot of young NGOs, and they are really having a lot of knowledge and the community's knowledge. And I hear for the last 5 days here, I was sitting in the Indonesian Pavilion. There are so many example of the field work, how that solution is. But there is also problem how to pick up that solution becoming scale up and scale out. That was really the most difficult one. it seemed to me that a lot of these ministry and then the Indonesian local government still business as usual. And how do we get this to the point that they are working collaboration and synergy toward the goals? Our goal is really big. Of course, Indonesia should be under 1.5 degrees Celsius. But currently, I think Indonesia, if this business as usual, we get at least 3 point something. So we have to be a lot of pressure to get this thing done. The third I want to talk about this young professional and youth is the millennial, the revolution of these 4.0 industrials. I saw that in my class, many people are really excited about this IoT, Internet of Things, big data, also the artificial intelligence. There's one of my really young graduate student who's really thinking about this using AI, for example, to monitor the deforestation in Indonesia. So that really, because always we're thinking about this technology thing is the old one. The new one, new generation of technologies, a new way of thinking. I think this is really, there has to be embracing by us as the old guys. And the fourth thing that I like to see is this, you know, there are so many solutions, maybe in Netherlands, also in Indonesia. When I talked to one of the NGOs close to Bogor in Indonesia, what they're doing is really training the local street boys to work with these organic plantings, coffee and vegetable and so on and so on. To me, this is kind of solution, you know, the old street boy in Jakarta who maybe 100 of them bring it to the one areas and they learn organic planting, that kind of solution. And the solution that also, if they are doing this organic thing, instead of using fertilizer, instead of using pesticide, instead of using, those are the environmentally the hazard for people, I think this is kind of solution. So you don't have to be the third that I was talking about, the IoT and things. The fifth one, the last one, as you know that I'm the head of this SDSN, Sustainable Development Solution Network. SDSN has been trying really hard to get the solution in the communities. Because when we are talking about this thing, of course, this is in the COP24, but I thought that there should be, how do we do it in the level of communities? How do we prototyping the thing that resilience is in the communities, in the fishermen communities? Because, you know, sea level rise. When I was long time ago when I was a student, there is island in just across of Jakarta, Onrus Island. Now, no more island. It's already submerged into the ocean. So it's predicted 2030 will be 1,500 island will be submerged. Should we stay like, are we watching this because of sea level rise in Jakarta? Jakarta already subsidence for 8 meters. Netherlands is under the water, of course, 1/3 or 2/3 maybe. But they are managed, technologically, they can manage this thing better. But Jakarta, I have the task by the governor to look at this, the possible sea level rise in this Jakarta Bay. So, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude this, I love that young professional has to have something in common, help the communities, but again, evidence-based, science-based policy has to be in place. Otherwise, it's easy that you develop this community and others when the local government and the central government making this a policy wrongly, or maybe they unconsciously they develop this thing. And I heard this lot of things. No more front cities. Front cities is now it changes to the smart cities, which is not too much on people in the front of this beach. I think that's the ideas of prototyping, new way of thinking that are not really the way they are thinking has to be changed. Has to be more proactive to see how the environment is about, especially with the era of the climate change where Indonesian possible to have the sea level rise way of too many cities in Indonesia. I think we have to do things. So that's my conclusion. Thank you very much, Ibu Yanti and everybody, and welcome. I should apologize because I have to leave early, maybe about 10:20, because I have to catch my flight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Yatna, for your insights. So we are going to talk about professional standards related to climate change. And as I said earlier, it is actually a bit of pity that there has been little debate or discussion about professional standards in relation to climate change. Yeah, that's why we have invited here, most insightful young people and less young people as well, that may have interesting views, inspiring views, which we could build on further. And this short event is far too limited to discuss this complex issue. But it is our hope that we could spark further discussion to further investigate and investigate and discuss and take action on this important issue. Desti? Yes, let's start.
So, we should start with, I choose Kamia. Kamia. So as was mentioned before, earlier in the introduction, before starting your PhD study in the Netherlands, you had worked as environmental specialist in the Indonesian state electricity sector or company, namely PLN, Perusahaan Listrik Negara. In that capacity, we do believe that one of the challenging responsibilities was to make sure that the company's decision makers paid attention to the environmental impacts on their decisions. And as you know, the 2015 Paris Climate Conference has in fact brought a new challenge for energy sector professionals, which is that Indonesia's commitment to the Paris Agreement is in fact difficult to align with the country's development needs for energy. So within this context, what have been challenges you have faced as environmental and climate professionals working in the public energy sector? And could you also share with us on how you have dealt with them, please?
Thank you for the questions. First of all, I would like to thank Mbak Yanti and Mbak Desti for organizing these sessions and also for inviting me. It is an honor for me to be here. Indeed, providing universal electricity access to Indonesia is a vital goal for the Indonesian power sector. As we know that today there are still over 3 million Indonesian households do not have access to electricity. And the National Energy Policy 2014 has the target to achieve 100% electrification ratio by 2020. So this is the vital goal of the Indonesian development, to provide electricity to all of the Indonesian people. But we also know that the electricity productions has consequences for the environment, for the global warming, because currently our electricity production is still relies heavily on fossil fuel. But the government also has the target, has pledged, like you said, has pledged to reduce its emissions by 29% in 2030, and 11% of this reduction should be coming from emission reductions from the from the energy sector. So, so we are moving toward low carbon power systems. I can say that in terms of policy, we already have a policy framework in place for shifting from fossil fuel power generations to renewable to low carbon power system. And on top of this vital goal of electrifications and also climate change mitigations, actually the electricity sector itself has already been affected by climate change. For instance, severe weathers like heavy precipitations, storm, heavy wind have caused widespread electricity cuts throughout the countries in the past. So these challenges, if we say how the electricity sector can be developed in a sustainable way, low carbon, and also not only low carbon but also climate resilience. So this actually become my motivations to do my PhD research. So the Indonesian government through the Ministry of Finance granted me the scholarship to do my PhD at the University of Twente. So my research focused on climate change mitigations and adaptations in the power sector. The questions on how power sector can meet the Paris Agreement target, and how can the power sector can be more resilient to the consequences of climate change. I translate these questions into my research questions, and partly the questions has been answered through the result of our research, and it's already published in the peer-reviewed journal. So if you're interested to know more about the approach and methodologies and the results in details about how the Indonesian power sector can shift from fossil fuel power-based generations to low carbon and climate resilience power system, I will be happy to send you the articles that we have published so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Kamia. So it's quite interesting overview about the challenges you have faced so far, especially once you're trying to face it in front of your company's decision makers and your fellow professionals and so on. We may have still some time to.
Yeah.
Or
yeah, we can later on build on that. So
elaborate a bit.
yeah, let's proceed to the next panelists. But thank you, Kamia, for your insights and having shared your experience being an environmental specialist, and later on being a science research professional within the context of a public state company. I think that's quite. It could be quite challenging. I think from that perspective that you just have shared, it's a tiny step to the next question, and I'd like to turn to Anissa. Anissa, as was mentioned by Desti in her introduction about you. You are engaged as a young scientist representative in the United Nations system, and in particular on the area of disaster risk reduction. It sounds impressive, but also challenging, I think. From that position, you may have observed or experienced that building knowledge about climate change is a continuous process. As long as the climate change, we still have to build our knowledge about the phenomenon, and it's a relatively new phenomenon, but also about the impacts at all levels. Yeah. So my question to you, this ongoing process may create uncertainty professionally, so also uncertainties for the professionals. What is your view about that? I mean, what are the implications of this uncertain context for professionals like you are, or Camilla, or Tisa? Yeah? Yeah. Please.
Thank you so much for the question. Before answering your question, I'm just wondering from the audience here, who are considering themselves as a young professionals? Okay. Okay. Well, young can be very relative, you know. It can be also young in spirit as well. And what is most important is that people who believe in the power of young professionals and youth to actually change the world. Who are here from the government sector? Okay. But you are youth as well? Okay, great. So happy to see. No? And NGO sectors? 2, okay. 3, yeah. Private sectors? 3, great. And the rest? How do you identify yourself? Like mixed, maybe? Yeah, the reason I asked this is really related to the question that Yanti asked me, is about how this uncertainty actually from climate change affects the professionals. I think the key points here is that it affects wide variety of actors. It's not just about government, it's not private sectors, NGOs, academicians. Maybe I haven't asked, actually, academicians also very important, because climate change is all about coherence. Climate change is about interdisciplinary. Climate change is about transdisciplinary. It means that nobody here is actually an expert in climate change. They are expert in different kind of fields that are impacted by climate change. From my point of view, I'm working mostly in the disaster risk reduction field, which is very relevant to climate change, because you know that climate change can impact a lot of like extreme weather events, disaster, etc. But then it's also affecting a lot of different sectors like agriculture, you know, business, everything. So I think the challenge is now how to actually address this climate change impact together, and how to actually build coherence among each other in different sectors. And particularly about young professional, maybe, I mean, Camilla already mentioned about her work in PLN, but I think if you're specifically talking about young professionals, our role is actually more challenging, because we are usually the one that is underestimated, right? We're still building our knowledge, but we have a lot of passion to actually learn and actually be an agent of change. Because if you are already in government sectors for so long, you have your own responsibility. Okay, I'm looking for it because you're the nearest, but it's for everyone. Is that you are already shaped in a different kind of, I would say, perspectives, because you have your mandates as a government. But then, in terms of young professionals, we are still very versatile. I mean, we can engage in any different type of field, research, politics, business, and I think that's the strength of young professionals in this way. And to come back again to your questions about uncertainty, this is a world that we have to face in the next centuries. This is the challenge that is very real in front of us. What I would like to suggest for us is actually to bring more of a partnership, collaboration, using our own expertise as young professionals, together with people who are actually believe that this world has to be sustainable for our children and grandchildren. And I think we need to really build this trust among each other to actually facing different challenges regarding climate change. My question might be, my answer might be very general, but I think that's the most important point I would like to share with you. Mm-hmm. Maybe you have any follow-up questions.
Thank you, Anissa. You're very inspiring. Yes, thanks. Maybe a follow-up question on that. You are also part, or you are part of an advisory group, science and technology advisory group at UN level. So you have also been in the process of thinking of the concept of innovation. How do you relate that to young professionals? What are their roles, their responsibilities?
Thank you. I think Prof. Yatna also mentioned about this innovation. It's funny because I just came back from a meeting in Brussels talking about its expert group meeting on science and technology innovation roadmap for SDGs. We're talking a lot about the word of innovation and technology. But I feel like there's something missing from the perspective, how we talk about technology and innovation. It's not always about technical innovation. We always have to think about the non-technical aspect that mostly actually the key success of a implementation of technology of innovation. It's a tool for us to actually, reducing impact of climate change, to achieve sustainability. The whole discussion in the Science and Technology Advisory Group on Disaster Reduction, where I already engaged in the last 2 years, is actually how to bring the notion of technology towards more of the implementation, the implication in the local level. Because in the end, what is important is that's actually useful and sustainable. So if you talk about innovation, well, IoT, drones, etc., it's kind of already boring, I would say. It's a buzzword that everyone always tries to use, to make sure that we are up to pace for the conversation that's happening now. But what is important actually the skill to use that innovation. It actually includes leadership, it actually includes networking, it actually includes how you approach community, and I think young professionals are actually the key for that. Because they're actually the one that's very close to the community, very communicative. I'm working in a very high level, not to be, talking too high or something, but in the UN level, we usually talk about lip service. We talk about things that need to cover in the global level. But what is actually important is actually this researcher and everyone that work in the community to actually take that forward to the community. Yeah, that's my view.
Thank you, Anissa. Yeah.
For sure, it's inspiring, insightful, and so on. But then also, at least for me, it should be also important to bring youth. So instead of young professionals, so maybe if also can help me the definition of youth itself. So to bring youth in the central of climate change discussion, really because youth is the future, our future. So I will turn to Evke. So as Dutch youth representative to the UN on sustainable development, you represent also current and future professionals. Perhaps among them, or well, more than among earlier generation professionals, young professionals have recognized that climate change is real. They could be a group that, well, I should say, can effectively or powerfully call government or wider society to take climate action. So, do you see any need to more strongly position young professionals in national as well as in multilateral decision making on climate? And if so, what strategy or approach would you, as youth representative, use in doing so? Please.
All right, so, hello. These are a lot of questions in one question maybe, but just to start, I think indeed our generation, my generation, has a lot of awareness on this topic. And what I see, what's happening in the Netherlands, because we have this kind of awareness, there's also a lot of pressure on young people feeling, you know, to be honest, afraid about their future as well. And before we can form this front of young people helping the transition into a sustainable future, we should first recognize that there is this call for help from young people in the Netherlands maybe, that if they are aware of the things that are happening, then we should help them to feel empowered to do something with it. Because I know I've experienced it. I've talked to a lot of young people that also experienced it. The pressure on their shoulders is really high. If you watch the documentaries, if you know what's going on, I've been to a few meetings here with scientists, and someone said, "Well, prepare for the end of the world," and then you're sitting here like, "Okay, I'm going to be here for maybe 70 more years. Should I prepare now? Is there something I can still do?" So it's kind of you know, the key thing is to empower them to look at the solutions and not be disencouraged by the things that are happening. So that's something that I think is really important before we take the step of using them as a front to, you know, help other generations, honestly, because the creativity and the energy that young people bring to the table are really important in this issue. And a strategy I would use for this, and like walking around here, this is my first COP, so really interesting to be here. But walking around, I've noticed that a lot of politicians say, like, it's up to the young people and it's up to you. And we're sitting in this in the audience, and I'm thinking, like, well, but you're probably here for 50 years as well. So why don't we do this together, you know? I understand it's a strong statement to say the young people, and it's nice for media coverage maybe. But my approach to this would be, you know, the hippies must be somewhere still, and they must have good ideas about how to handle this stuff, so they can help us in this transition. And if we use the wisdom and the knowledge of older generations and the energy of the younger people, that combination, you know, I think that would be really strong. So if everybody would take their own responsibility and we could bond our strengths, I think that would be the best strategy to tackle this. Yes.
Yeah, would be great then. So what should I do then right now?
Yeah, let's be hippies.
Yeah. Take home message for today. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you indeed.
Impressive.
Yeah.
I should say.
For your
approach and
inspirational thoughts. And we will certainly take that along in our future. So you just highlight some responsibilities of each of us, not only the young professionals. Starting from that, I would like to go to Tisa. Hi, Tisa. Yeah. Yeah, let's talk also about professional responsibilities among the young. Tisa, you are the executive director of the Indonesia Plastic Bag Diet Movement. While holding that position, your expertise is public policy, specializing in environmental law, waste management, and climate change policy. That's quite a rich background. And in the past, you used also to be an attorney, isn't it? Yeah. Mm-hmm. You may agree with me that climate change is relatively new phenomenon, and its impacts are not yet fully understood, professionally as well. So that is why there is no widespread agreement among government, professionals, professional associations, about professional standards that relate to climate change. I think this is a serious issue. Would you agree with that?
Partly, partly disagree.
Please, yes. Okay.
But thank you for the question. I think the impacts of climate change are pretty clear. If people are still denying the impacts of climate change, maybe they're living in a cave somewhere. But a decade ago, I think people were still, the narrative was still that climate change has impacts in a few years, in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. But the narrative today is that we're already feeling the impact of climate change on a day-to-day basis. And this is true both for North countries as well as South countries. So we're all in a phase where, okay, it's happening. So I think in relation to how that kind of impact can influence how professionals act and behave or are responsible for their daily lives, that's the kind of work that my organization and the kind of work that all the, can we call ourselves activists? I think we can, because there are loud activists and there are quiet activists, and they're all both very relevant. I'll talk a little bit about that. But I think that's the role of activists, is trying to relate what's happening in the environment to how you should change your day-to-day behavior, both at home and at work, both in your personal space and in your professional space. Yes, I was a lawyer before. Those were darker times. I'm kidding. But yes, I worked long hours. And then at the time, I created this organization called the Plastic Bag Diet Movement. It's a youth movement for sure, because we were all in our 20s when we created this movement. And I'm in my 30s now, so I think I'm still young, right? Yes? Thank you. And now I'm also working at Climate Policy Initiative. I'm an associate director at CPI. It's a think tank that focuses on climate policy and mostly climate finance. So the work that we do at the Plastic Bag Diet Movement is mostly voluntary, but it consumes about 50%, 60% of my time, because it's so exciting, it's so important, and it's so, it's such a professional endeavor, I have to say. People don't usually relate activism to professionalism, because when people say you're an activist, what people think of are, okay, maybe you don't have a job, so you have a time to go out in the streets and, carry posters and yell and to attract media attention, and maybe you don't need money that much, or you're a hippie. But that's absolutely not true. There's a quiet activist and there's a loud activist, and both are absolutely necessary. And what I mean by being loud is that there are those who focuses on creating that kind of awareness, on creating slogans that are catchy, on converting the unconverted, to create a more massive awareness that there's a problem and this is how you should deal with it. What I mean by quiet activism is that behind all that, there's work. There's hard work being done, and there's actual core skills that are put into that work. And the skills could be anything. For me, it's legal skills, because I'm a lawyer, and what I've done in my activism is I've poured my skills into creating and crafting policies that can reduce plastic at the source. So talking to governments, crafting draft regulations for them, actually becoming official technical advisors to the government to make sure that their formulated legal policies are legally airtight, are publicly acceptable, have gone through the public consultation processes that are necessary to go through, have been consulted through all the levels of government that it needs to be consulted. It's just airtight. But nobody really nobody knows that. It's kind of boring and tedious work. It's not very exciting. It's not social media worthy to post pictures of documents on my Instagram. That's very important work. It actually gets done behind the scenes. And a lot of the activists that we see out there yelling, they also do that kind of work. You just don't see it. Now, in the front, we also do campaigns. We go down the streets. We do these plastic bag robbery campaigns where we take plastic bags that we see on the streets and we switch them with reusable bags. We do beach cleanups. We do river cleanups. We make videos. And a lot of our volunteers are young people, are students, are young professionals, are marathon runners, volunteers who just care. And that kind of campaign is creating the awareness, and that's the kind of thing that people see that's catchy. And so people say, oh, you're activists, I know you. You're the youth group, right? Well, that's a fine label. But I think people should be aware, and maybe the young people who are coming up and trying to get into the world of activism should also be aware that there's two kinds of work that goes into activism and creating change. And that's the one that people see, and that's the one that behind the scenes, and both are equally important. I don't know if that answered your question, but I'll leave it to here, and then maybe someone has more questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tisa. Yeah. It went much more beyond that I've sought for. Thank you. Yeah. So yeah, Tisa. So we just heard from Tisa that she regards herself, well, as an activist, but that activism could also become a professional standard, also in relation to advocacy, advocacy towards the government, for example. Yeah, so among our panelists, we do have one government representative, Marcel Beukeboom. Marcel, you are the Dutch climate envoy. You must be tired after 2 weeks of work. And
I still look young, don't I?
After 2 weeks, you mean? I can read your face that you think, oh, thanks God it's Friday. Yeah, so perhaps you have observed in the last 2 weeks and much longer than that in the past, that a lot of discussion about taking action on climate change focus on the need to take action by government, by corporates or industry, communities or individuals. But now my question is, what about young professionals as a group? Are they, you think, sufficiently incorporated in the discussion? And you as a representative of the government, yeah, usually professionals are organized in associations, and I know that those associations are self-regulating. But from a government point of view, what do you think government should do? In what way could government shape conditions to also, let's say, enhance professionals' position in the negotiations on climate change?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Yanti. In a way, also the title for this conference or for this event is stating the obvious. Young professionalism does add something to, in this case, negotiations, to a subject, and I think all the panelists adhere to that and gave good examples and arguments why that should be the case. Because there is added value in having several generations at the table and talk about the solutions that we need for climate change. And there I disagree a little bit with you. indeed, as you also said, this is not a new phenomenon. We know this for quite a long time, and we know we have to be very active in finding solutions and doing everything we can to fight climate change. And that goes across generations. And also agree with Eefke, I hope I still also have about 40, 50 years on this planet, and that means I have to be very active in doing something about it. And I do that in my work, so that is the activism that I bring. I try to do my work as well as possible. But your question goes into the organization, so beyond the self-evidence of the proposition that young generations have to sit at the table, young professionals. The question then is, how are you going to do that? And I know of a few good examples in my country, in the Netherlands, how we involve young groups of professionals in the national negotiations for a national climate agreement. And one very good example is the group of, they call themselves the climate and energy professionals. And you said, well, they should be self-organized. They are self-organized. They are. They came out of the initiative of a few young professionals who saw, well, within the organization that I work, and that is often a big energy corporation or a government or another business, I don't have enough clout, enough possibilities to have the influence that I actually want to have. So I should find strength in connecting to people in a similar position in a different organization. And by organizing themselves like that, they got not only the strength of the argument, because I think that was there already, but also the size that was necessary to also get involved in those national agreements and the national negotiations for a climate agreement. And with that size, but definitely knowledge on the content, they found themselves an entry into those tables with others coming from science, big corporations, local government, civil society, and sitting at par at those tables to talk about what is really necessary. And I think the ticket will always be knowledge, and since you as young people do not have so many years of experience, it actually asks for even more knowledge on the content. But if you can prove that you have that added value and that having a different perspective on issues brings something to the solution, you have not only a right, because you do have a right to sit at the table, but you also have the arguments to stay. Because just being young is nice. What Eefke, oh yeah, I think you said it as well, is nice for the picture. No, just be a bit cynical and just underscoring that point. Many politicians do think it's good to do that, but continuation of the conversation comes with other qualities. And what we see and what I see is many of the groupings that also are sitting here do have that knowledge and that expertise and do add to the discussions.
Thank you, Marcel. Yeah, thanks for your insights. I think we can.
Yeah, although
yeah, please.
Yeah. Although gathering and combining professionals' expertise could be, well, the most important one, but then in fact, well, at least for me, the effort itself in doing so is quite challenging. I mean, especially because there is a general rule that professionals should not speak outside expertise, so somewhat doing so. So, well, I would like to turn again to Anissa. As trained scientists, after hearing Marcel's view, well, do you advise climate resilient professionals to follow such a specific code of conduct in this regard?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think it comes back to Yanti's question to Tiza as well about the standards of professionals in climate change. I do believe that it's impossible to have one standard because we're coming from different backgrounds. But then what most important is the awareness of that we have this, climate change issues affecting every different aspects of our lives, and also that will actually affect the way we are doing science. At least I'm from the RR field. It's known as a kind of low-hanging fruit, like the impact of climate change. But what most scientists doesn't actually realize, I think now they get to know more about the needs of thinking ahead, about how to actually incorporate the bigger picture. But that's not all scientists has. Depends on what kind of background, because they have such a specific, how do you call it, specificness of a science. If you come from the natural science perspective, for example, don't talk about science policy interface. Talking about social science integration with natural science is already challenging. So I think it's for me, I'm sorry if it sounds really pessimistic, it's impossible to have a standard. But what we can do is actually to stick on what we know, ethics of research that we're doing in our own field, and trying to bring this discussion among different interdisciplinary science group, from natural, social science, trying to discuss these ethical issues together and actually bring more constructive discussion how to tackle it together. You know, this whole thing about complementing each other, the whole thing about you know, consolidating solutions together. I think that's most important. I don't believe that we have to have climate resilience scientists or researchers or one code of conduct. I believe that there's a strength on diversity, but what we need, actually back to my first point, to discuss it. Sit together, have a platform. Because what happens is, if we leave it like this, informal discussion, it will not go anywhere. Like you said about how to bring them into the table is already a hard work. But then it's in the end back to themselves how they can actually engage more and prove that qualities. But I think this work of an opening entry point, both for interdisciplinary science discussion, science policy interface, or engaging youth, whatever the situation is a very, very job of the government. Yeah, I don't know, but because they are the one who is actually having the, you know, the mandates to do that.
Let's be adaptive. We actually have a second round of questions, but yeah, the answers are so rich that we are beyond our intention to have that second round. And I see that there are people who'd like to give feedback or input. And I got some whispering from you, Adi, the head of the Secretariat of the Indonesia Pavilion. You'd like to give some feedback or input?
Yes, some information. My name is Adi. I'm with the Ministry of Environment and Forestry of Indonesia. I'm Director of Standards for Environment and Forestry. So standard is one of instrument for change, regulatory and standards. Those are important instruments for change. Now that I would like to give you some examples of what have been prepared in Indonesia. One, in this professionalism, professionals working towards this standard. And number two, practical know-how at the stakeholder level. Okay, let me start with number one. As a professional's capacity, so in Indonesia we have introduced a standard for green building, sustainable building. I see not only in Indonesia but in many countries, green building movement. That brings the movement of change of the competencies, architects, interior designer, and building construction services, and new materials coming, yeah. So that is one way of moving these professionals ahead with new knowledge, with new tools of how to calculate, you know, the amount of energy coming and the amount of energy going out, you know, the air conditioning, the lighting, and the landscape arrangement so that it's environmentally friendly and also climate friendly. So a lot of development there, capacity development there, with what kind of something like training and also some certification of these new competencies already take place, and they are doing a very good job in moving this building sector towards green building and climate friendly building. And number two, in the profession of the energy management. In the manufacturing factories, they have a standard, and they have these energy managers now with the new qualification and new set of competencies, new standard, and also this is new qualification of job. And so this is some examples that this movement is moving. Young people, of course, welcome. And that's why we are trying to engage with the universities to introduce this standard as early as when you study at universities and obtaining your undergrad studies, etc., already equipped with this new knowledge, with this new understanding, with these new tools, so that after you graduate, okay, you are ready to go for these professionals with climate understanding, with with competencies to move forward. And we are now trying to develop this competency system for resource efficiency in Indonesia. Resource efficiency. And so this is something that we discuss also with the universities, we discuss also with the professionals, that yes, we will move towards providing recognition of these professionals working in resource efficiency, standards, reporting, and etc. Yeah. And number two, in the area of practical know-how, knowledge, all the stakeholders, that includes housewives, that includes the catering services, that includes the cleaning service, that includes the office management, so that Indonesia will propose in UNEA 4 next March 2019 a partnership to develop this stakeholder readiness to get this practical know-how and knowledge down there in the implementation on the ground. Indonesia proposed to develop this partnership to bring the knowledge, the know-how down to that level at the operational level by all stakeholders. Practical knowledge.
Thank you, Pa.
That includes for the climate and resiliency, as well as how to handle chemicals management, how to use plastic responsibly, how to use paper responsibly, and also energy efficiency at home, at the office, and at the others. So this is something that Indonesia would like to move this further on this knowledge.
Thank you, Pa.
At the practical level. Thank you.
Pa Nur. Yeah, very valuable invaluable input, Pa Adi. I'm glad that you have shared with us the status in terms of competency in relation to climate resilience. Thank you.
And we have
Desti,
one more. Or
shall we now move
or briefly or so
to the question? Yes,
sure. I think that's
from
more
the audience.
valuable.
Go ahead.
Mention your name.
Yes, my name is Bas Tunter from the University of Radboud in Nijmegen in the Netherlands, and I wanted to ask Anissa and Tisa a question. When I was little in high school, I felt there's a lot of things going wrong in the world. The climate change is happening, and it's very, for me as a small boy, it's very difficult to help save the planet, because that's what I wanted to do. And I'm very glad that the Dutch government gives multiple opportunities to do so. And I was wondering, to what degree did you receive opportunities from the government of Indonesia to make a change happen, and maybe to what degree can the Dutch government facilitate those opportunities? So I would love to hear your stories, how you experience that.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Would you like to start with, or?
Sure, yeah. Well, thank you so much for the question. I'm living in Nijmegen, so we should catch up. Intermezzo. Yeah, I do agree with you. I was also kind of thinking before I engage in this whole discussion, how can I get engaged? I first started studying PhD, I think the same scholarship with Camilla from the Ministry of Science, Ministry of Finance, sorry. Ministry of Finance. I think that's already proof that there is a support, a big support from my government for us to actually study abroad, especially in the Netherlands. When you talk about disaster reduction, climate change, you guys are very known expert on that. So in that sense, we get a very good support from the government. But I think what is important is now how to upscale this opportunity, right? In a sector, education sector is very formal sector, going abroad, getting scholarship, studying in a university. What I feel like should be upscaled is the one that involve activism, NGO, youth organization. Actually, they have such a big voice, I mean, in a good way. Good input to the government. And there's a lot of already, examples of how civil society organization, including youth, get engaged in different discussions, sustainable development goals. I heard from you that you advise government. There is a door for that. Another thing that can be upscaled is actually the representation mechanism. We talk about informal activism are very important because they're going to the grassroots. But the government role is actually how to collect it, upscale it, and really take it as ways to influence their policy. I think that's the most challenging one. And I really hope that the government of Indonesia, anyone from here, from this room, can actually take this forward. And I applaud actually the Dutch government who already have this Netherlands Jongere Raad, which is a representation of youth in different process. It's a very massive success. But Indonesia is very difficult because we are 17,000 islands, very different kind of demography, a lot of young people. So I think it's also a challenge how to actually bring this voice upscale and influence policy.
I think for me, it's not immediately obvious how the government supports. But I was in junior high school when Reformasi happened. This was when the former president, Suharto, resigned and ended the era of 30 years of authoritarianism, basically. And after that, democracy flourished in Indonesia. And I feel like having grown up in that area, that era and experiencing the two different, the authoritarian regime and the democratic regime, there is kind of a responsibility for the youth to take part in that democracy, this young democracy that's flourishing at the moment. And the way that I personally took part in that was to make sure that I engaged with the government, because they're no longer blocking us, right? They're now open to talking to all levels of society, to the not just to the media, but also to civil society and also to the private sector. They weren't open before. And I've pushed some boundaries and found that there is a lot that you can do, as long as you know how to talk to the government. They're willing, actually, and they're actually admitting that they need a lot of help and input from society at large. And so I guess there is support. It's just not immediately obvious, and you can't passively wait around for it. You have to seek it actively and push some boundaries through some effort, I found that my work with the government has been mostly positive instead of negative. I think people are mostly viewing government as negative. Oh, it's such a massive bureaucracy, they're so old-fashioned, and what kind of work do they do in there? Are they even working, you know? But when you start working with the government and, you know, pushing solutions instead of problems to them, you find that they're just as professional as everybody else is. And so there needs to be more of this, yeah? There needs to be more of this dialogue between these young professionals, young activists, civil society, and government. Because only through that method have we been able to get 3 cities to ban plastic bags so far, and we're working on another 5. I think that's a huge, you know, it's step by step, but it's a very, very tangible impact, and it couldn't have happened without the government. Thanks.
Thank you, Tisa. So, yeah, I see that there are several hands, but I also saw yeah, you raised your hand a bit earlier than you did, so please. We have only some limited time left, so please be short, and also in the answering.
Hello. Okay. My name is Werani. I work for the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, the IPCC Secretariat. And mine is more a comment, because I had a comment, or I had something about climate science and policy interface. And I just wanted to encourage the scientists on the panel to please get involved in the work of the IPCC through the various different processes, because it's important that you have your voice represented there. And the ways to get involved are different. You can visit our website to find out. But it is extremely important that the issues that are being discussed, even at that scientific level, have your voice. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your input. Yeah. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. Thank you very much. My name is Nila Pati. I come from Indonesia, but currently I'm studying in Nijmegen. And Nijmegen in the Netherlands has been a really great second home for me, because I've been creating a zero waste movement since 3 years ago, and the local municipality is really accepting, despite the fact that I'm an expert, you know, I come from outside the Netherlands, and bringing ideas to the local governments, and they accept it and they actually implement it and everything. And but then the how to call it, the positive thing that I have is I have privilege. I have education, I managed to go abroad, you know, like I have knowledge about it. But then when we talk about Indonesia, which is very, very, you know, a big country with many diverse cultures that we have, we also have something called indigenous law and indigenous heritage that we earn, that we own there since many thousand years ago. But the problem is that if we, for example, go to the east part of Indonesia, these people doesn't have the privilege of education, but they do have this local wisdom that they have into taking care of the nature. So then my question is for anybody in the panel, how we as a youth that have this privilege empower the people in these small little islands that actually have the knowledge to taking care of the nature and to use this wisdom for taking care of our country. Thank you very much.
Who'd like to reply? And please keep your answer within this theme. Yeah. Evke? Oh, okay. Please be short, Anita.
Yeah, just short. Someone from the IPCC. I think she already left.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No, just a glance that there's a massive process in the UN. SDGs, IPCC, disaster risk reduction have a process as well. I think my work in STAG, UNSDR, is actually how to try to mainstream this work that we have in disaster risk reduction and try to connect with colleagues who are working on the IPCC process. I think that's because there's such a massive different processes. So we're talking about coherence right now, how to actually scale up different work that connect to climate change and SDGs and make it mainstream. I think that's our work. And of course, there's someone already taking out on the IPCC work.
Thank you, Anissa. You'd like also to give an answer to that?
Yeah, from the science perspective, I think this is one of the things that we really advocate, is to validate science with indigenous knowledge and local knowledge, because that's very important. Science usually speaks for itself, but actually science comes from human, and human has culture, so that's a short point.
I'd like, yeah, we have to go towards wrapping up the session, but I'd like to give time to you, Pak.
Could you please mention your name first?
Terima kasih. I'm Wahyu Budiarto from Jakarta. Looking at my hair, I'm not young anymore. So a question on the young activism, I guess. A quick question. What misperception that old guys like me, older generation, you think have from your viewpoint as young activists? And what things that might be unconscious bias that we have toward you guys? And what you need to tell us, how do we change to be more receptive of this activism by the younger generation?
Who wants to pitch?
Change me.
Yeah, I can
Thanks
give a
for the
short
question.
answer to that. I mentioned it before in another event, but I think it's something that's really important, that I noticed that young people are often mocked for their sensitivity. So us being sensitive is like, oh, you are so sensitive, you're snowflakes, and yes, that's the term that I hear a lot. But the thing is that I would like to remind everyone of is that the lack of sensitivity is what got us in this mess in the first place. So that we care so much is something that should be encouraged and not mocked, of course. I'm not saying in general everybody does it, but it's something that I notice is happening. So that might be something that you could take into account. Yeah, thank you for your question. Good question.
Yeah, thank you, Eefke. I think we have to wrap up. I see your eyes glittering. Yeah. Perhaps one comment first, Pat, before going to you. Actually, we initiated this event also with the intention to start or to build a climate partnership led by the young. And some preparatory process has been ongoing. That's why we have invited 2 nationals. So nationals from Holland, from the Netherlands, and also nationals from Indonesia. But this theme, of course, it goes beyond country borders. It goes across borders. So, yeah. Having said that, I'd like to give you time, Pak. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Okay, please go ahead.
Yeah, just a little time. So that the Minister of Environment and Forestry has now start to improve our public facilities. That means our train stations, bus terminals, shopping malls, and city gardens, the public facilities. That we have this ministerial decree on the standard for service to make these public facilities environment friendly and climate friendly. That involves all of the communities using these facilities, and we have this committee to oversight this standard development. The ministerial decree says the committee should comprise of the representation from the young generations. Okay, so now we start to develop a standard for the future of the public facilities with the youth, with the young generations involved in the standard development. Okay, and 2019 we will see more and more of the discussion of where this new infrastructure development in Indonesia, public facilities, the standard for the service with the young generation perspectives in it. This is the way, one way that the Ministry of Environment and Forestry Indonesia is giving way of the young generations to shape the future of Indonesia. Of course, that the old generation still involved, but we give more of the voice of the young generations in writing the standard for the future. Standard for service to the community in public facilities, climate friendly, environmentally friendly. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Nur, Pak Adi. I think we have to wrap up. Yeah. Thank you so much for being here and also for having interacted. And you, distinguished speakers, thank you so much for your insights. And I think this has sparked further discussion and investigation. And as I said, we are intending to develop some kind of climate partnership led by the young. And it could start with Indonesia and the Netherlands. And if you'd like to join the efforts, let's discuss. Thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you very much for the moderator for this session and also for our interesting session today from the young professional speakers. And to commemorate this session, we have a token of appreciation that will be given from the host of the Indonesia Pavilion to all the speakers. So please, for the speakers, remain on the stage. And we are going to have also a photo session. Thank you.
Anissa, ya terima kasih ya. Esther, yes, you come ya. You already got, okay. Marcel. Udah. Ya, okay. Photo session. Ya. Oops.
Thank you very much for all the speakers in the session of Young Professionalism for Climate Resilience. After this, we are also going to have an important session of REDD result-based payment. So in 5 minutes, we have an art performance, and also for the participants, you can take a snack and refreshment first. And after that, we are going to have another session here at 10:30. Thank you.
But mostly the IAD. So, yeah.
If you like to have another session presentation, you can check this link. And this is for the official Ministry of Environment social media and also website. I'll send it to you.
And then my God.
Cek, cek, satu.